My primary responsibilities is engagement with the external fintech ecosystem. There's so much innovation and cool stuff happening with the ecosystem, and at JPMorgan Chase, we are spending a lot of time interacting with that ecosystem and understanding how we can partner together. One of the most exciting partnerships that we already have in place is with CFSI's Financial Solutions Lab, where we're helping fund companies that are really doing great things for people out there in this country. What's new about the emerging fintech ecosystem is there's an element of competition, meaning that many of the fintech companies out there are actually trying to acquire their own customers and in some ways compete with the banks. So we saw a whole sort of host of early stage startups that were coming in trying to compete with the banks. That was initially. Since then, we've seen a little bit of a change, which is that many of those companies that were competing with the banks have decided that they actually want to partner with the banks. And so they've come to us in a variety of forms looking to essentially partner with the banks. Lastly, what we've seen is some companies who have taken, let's call it the old school approach to fintech, and are actually building software companies with the express concern of trying to power the banks and sell software to the banks. So fintech, not new. We've definitely seen evolution, but certainly what has been new is the competition coming from this startup space. Well, I think when you're putting your business together, there's two very distinct models that you could, paths that you could go down. One path is going to be this direct to consumer, build your own brand. We call that the B2C business. And then there's more akin to a software company where you're just selling technology, hoping to actually sell it to banks and the more established financial institutions. And we would call that, in this case, the B2B model. Both models can be successful. You see a lot of companies tackling both. I would say one of the hardest things to do is try and accomplish both of those things at the same time. So we often see companies that are saying, yes, we're doing both. We're trying to build our own brand out in the marketplace, and we'd love to sell our software to banks. There's two completely different ways of organizing a company. And as a startup, one of the most precious things you have is time and resources. Best to focus those on one or the other versus trying to do both. When you're deploying resources as a startup, are you deploying those resources in marketing your brand on Facebook or on building a sales team who's going to come and talk to JPMorgan Chase? Two very different answers. One thing that you might not realize, though, is that many startups actually have the intent of building a B2B business, but in order to sort of just get off the ground, they need some customers to test and prove out their model with, and so they'll go down this sort of more consumer-oriented route. As long as you as a founder CEO are confident in which direction you ultimately want to go, that's okay. The consumer space can be a great place to test ideas, but again, you're building a completely different business if your goal is to sell to big banks and financial institutions. The sooner you can digest and realize that and plan for it, the better. That pivot becomes really difficult, and we've seen a lot of companies try. Not many have been terribly successful. One of the first things that we look for in any partner is just a maturity around the compliance and security space. It's going to be critically important if we decide to work together. The other thing that we want to see is that you have your product in the hands of end customers, whether that's direct to consumer or via another bank partnership, and that it's working as you think it's going to work. So this isn't an experiment anymore. This is something where you have proof that your product or service is going to add value either to the bank directly or to the bank's customers. So, that you're going to have to work with a few smaller banks to get those proof points, to build those case studies, essentially to answer all the questions that the big banks are likely to ask. We would rather you have the answers coming into those conversations rather than try and figure it out when working with us. Well, every bank has a little bit of a different model. I can just see it out there in the ecosystem. There are startup accelerators and incubators. There are venture investing funds that are corporate investing funds. There are startup competitions. There are innovation teams. So there are a myriad of different ways in which banks have chosen to engage with the early stage fintech ecosystem. The best sort of way to do it is to come in through someone you know. whether that's finding them over LinkedIn or using a network that you have, using an advisor, using an investor. A warm introduction is to a company is probably the best way to come in. That being said, you want to try and navigate to the organization that's best for your business. In some cases, that might be one of the teams that's dedicated to innovation. In some cases, that might be actually in the business in which you hope to ultimately sell into. So there's no real single way to approach a big bank, but I would go back and say the largest banks probably shouldn't be your first bank conversations. There are plenty of banks out there, and you can really understand a lot more about what banks want by starting those conversations with sort of a local bank or a regional bank or a credit union before you work up to the top 5 or top 10. I would say you probably want to start approaching smaller banks as soon as possible. There's no replacement or alternative to getting real customer feedback, and if ultimately you're looking to partner or sell to banks, those are your customers. So while you might be proving your product in market with consumers, you want to be having those early conversations with banks and financial institutions. That being said, the most successful partners that we've worked with have cut their teeth on a few real bank partnerships before really coming to Chase and trying to get in the door. And that's actually not just Chase, all of JPMorgan Chase. So when we find a company that's just a little bit more mature, has a few partnerships under their belt, have gone through the security and the risk and the compliance reviews, and know the questions and the answers to the questions that we're going to ask, those have been very successful. It's not to say that you can't be successful coming in at an earlier stage, but it's likely to take a little bit more time, and different banks have different tolerances for sort of learning with or co-development. You might find a bank that wants to co-develop a product with you and maybe maintain some exclusivity. On the other hand, you might find a bank that really just wants to find stuff that works and roll it out to their customer base. I think it actually is determined by the bank's existing strategy and roadmap. So if you're plugging into an existing project that's on a roadmap that's funded and prioritized, things could move very quickly. If you're not plugging into an existing project that's prioritized and funded, you're likely trying to influence people to create a project. And that whole cycle takes probably another X number of months. So, if you're responding to a request with a bank reaching out saying we want to talk to you, that very likely indicates that you're working on something that's strategic to them. I would take that call. If you're cold calling the bank and you get, this is really interesting, just hold on for a few months, that probably indicates to you that particular, what you're doing is not right now on their strategic roadmap, and so that sales cycle is certainly going to be a lot longer. Again, lots of different scenarios, and it's hard to say that there's a very sort of defined path. A few things to watch out for. One, at some point, if this is becoming serious, you're likely to have some executive interaction. If a bank is going to seriously partner with a fintech company and roll that out to their customers, whether it's the CMO, the CIO, or the CEO of that company, you're likely going to get some airtime, and from that conversation, you should be able to get a sense of how real or not real. If you're never having those conversations, maybe a warning sign that you're not on a track to success. The other sort of watch out is that there are a lot of innovation groups floating around Wall Street and in the big banks. Sometimes those groups are really well integrated into the business and they serve as a pipeline and a feeder into the business. Those would be great groups to work with. The watch out caveat is for some groups that are innovating for the sense of innovation and trying to just create, proof of concepts and pilots with no real sense of priority or result. If that goes well, where is it going to go? So before engaging in pilots, you should have a very clear understanding of, if this pilot is successful, what is the path? If it's just a pilot for a pilot, you might want to hold off on spending your resources on a project like that. When we talk, and where we have been talking about fintech partnerships, that's in terms of partnering with a fintech to bring a new service to the bank's customers. However, we are a bank, and we like to bank fintechs as well. And that's everything from a business banker to your merchant services. And as you grow from startup to well-funded startup to sort of successful public company, we have banking services all up and down the spectrum. Treasury services and cash management to lending, corporate cards, the list goes on and on. I think that the conversation around how do we leverage the bank's services to power our company essentially is better had with the business banker or the merchant services sort of banker who's there to help bring the power of the bank to you versus the teams that you're likely to be talking about, how do we partner close together. Certainly there's likely a bridge to be made there, but really two separate conversations. One is, we're a startup, we need a bank to do X, Y, and Z. We'd certainly be happy to talk to you about that. The second is, we want to partner with a bank to do something great with the bank. And those two conversations, while you might think that they're sort of one, are really two distinct conversations at JPMorgan Chase. If you're a fintech startup, exciting, good luck to you. You have a really exciting opportunity in front of you. The world of financial services is changing and innovation is ripe. That being said, if you're looking to talk to JPMorgan Chase, if you want to partner with us one day, we would love to hear from you, and please get in touch with us.